Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes? Matt here from YoVideogames, and I'm back again with a real talk video, or I guess you could say a list video, and I haven't done one of these in a long time, so I figured, maybe now's a good time since we're wrapping up the year or wrapping up the decade. I figured I'll do a nice fat list and a look back at some of the games that really seem to stand out for me over this past decade. Now, before I get into this, I want to try to make it a little nice and tight. Some of these videos tend to go a bit long. I'm going to try to avoid that right now. But before I get into it, let me just go down this list and clarify that this is not an influential list. This is not the most influential games of the 2010s. I mean, you're not going to see Minecrafts and Overwatches and whatever have you games on here. It's not about that. It's not about influential games. This is strictly about the games that I played in the 2010s that I enjoyed the most. And it's not necessarily about like the games I played the longest, because there are games not going to be on this list that I've played much longer than some of the games that are on the list. It's just about which games did I generally think were the best games to come out this decade. And what was surprising was how hard it was for me to narrow this down to 10. Because I thought originally I was like, I'll pick the best game of each year from 2010 to 2019. And then I kind of realized going in that, man, there were some years where there were a lot of games I really liked, and some years where there was like hardly anything that I would put on a super high pedestal. And then there was times where it's like, okay, well, the best games of these years aren't even close to like some of like the multiple games I loved from another year. So like one year might have had like 2 or 3 games that I thought were absolutely fantastic and were better than anything in the years preceding that. So basically I just said I took everything that I looked at and listed, and then I broke it down and just said, we're just going to do the 10 best regardless of year. So maybe I'll shout out some honorable mentions at the end or something, but yeah, I'm just boiling this down from 2010 to now, basically the end of 2019. These were my 10 favorite games of the decade. So, number 10 was Metal Gear Rising. And boy, oh boy, did I love the shit out of this game. This was probably the game that, to me, exemplified how to do boss battles correctly. Like, this game nailed boss battles. And boss battles are kind of a tough thing in video games because they either tend to be just a huge challenge or like a final checkpoint, or sometimes you get what's called a victory lap final boss, but none of that was the case in Metal Gear Rising. They were tough but fair bosses all the way through, all the way to the end. And in fact, the game almost feels it was designed around its boss encounters more than the actual game. The actual gameplay is perfectly good. It's a great fun game, but the boss battles here just really exemplify like top of the line. I don't think there's probably any game even on this list that had, maybe barring one, that had any better boss battles in any of its respective genres or whatever. But yeah, Metal Gear Rising is my favorite Metal Gear game. I think it's the best Metal game because when you sit down and say, hey, which Metal Gear game do you want to replay? And in my mind, to be truthful, I will always say I'd like to replay Rising. It's one of the few games where I've gone back and just beaten it on like harder and harder and harder difficulties. Usually I feel like once a game's kind of done, it's done. I don't really, I'm not really usually into like insane impossible challenges, but like Metal Gear Rising was a bucking of that trend, just because the general feel, flow, control, options, everything you do is great. The soundtrack, of course, is amazing. I can't really showcase that because it's copyright hell. But yeah, like amazing soundtracks, amazing characters, a story that realizes how incredibly crazy anime the Metal Gear series always has been. And this time, instead of trying to pretend to be some espionage real-world thriller, they just said, fuck it, we're going all out, we're going full bore, just balls to the wall nuttiness, and I love it for it because it's a video game. It's a video game-ass video game, still set in the Metal Gear universe. It still has, a pretty good, plot, or at least a good message. It has its Metal Gear isms. It just realizes that it's a crazy fun action video game and has no problem showing that off. So yeah, number 10, Metal Gear Rising. My number 9, probably a bit of a surprise, not going to be on anyone else's Game of the Decades list probably, for me, is RiME. RiME was a beautiful sort of indie slash not indie, kind of really hard to classify that. Sort of a, I guess you could say, an exploration puzzle-based game. Definitely, you get the vibes of something like Eco is probably the closest thing you can sort of compare it to. Maybe Journey. It's in that sort of realm of game style, but it does something that I think was very important and intriguing, and that is, it's a game completely devoid of any sort of combat. It's almost entirely devoid of any sort of confrontational encounters, but it does have those. And you do face adversity from other enemy-like creatures in the environment. You do have to overcome them, but there's no attacking. There's no combat to speak of, and you don't miss it. I think the most important thing is that not just, hey, it's a non-violent game. It's a non-violent game that you won't even notice as you're playing through it. Oh shit, that's right. You don't actually attack anything in the game. I mean, you kind of, sort of do. If you've played through it, you kind of understand. But the other thing that's really important for me is that it's a nice storyline that is told visually completely. There's no text, no dialogue, no words, nothing. It tells its story completely through its visuals and music, and it's a nice story. It's well done, but it actually uses the medium of gaming to tell the story by using the environment and your own exploration and your own little visual and on audio clues as you pick up, and you'll get more out of the story too the more you search and look around for things. And like it all culminates in a sort of like, it mixes gameplay with the storytelling element, so that how you play the game, the more invested you are, the more story you will get out of it, because again, there's no text, there's no spoken dialogue. It's just everything has to be done through your own actions and what you see through the game, and I love it for that. And I really wish more games would try to tackle it on this angle. I know Nintendo especially likes to be like very hands off with its story, do very little with it. But I mean, they still have text, and their stories are usually very, very basic as fuck. But RiME was like, no, it's a sad tale, but it's also using gameplay to tell it without having to do any text boxes whatsoever. And it's a game that goes on sale a lot. I think it's really worth it, especially if you got a good PC, if you got a PS4. I don't know what state the Switch version is in at this point, but it's a wonderful, wonderful game. It's a game that truly shows that you don't need a AAA budget to shine. You just need good art style. You just need a good vision. You just need good design to do it, and I think RiME totally hits that. Number 8 best game of the decade for me is Killer Instinct. Now, this one might be a little close to home, or maybe a little bit biased, because I was pretty darn close to the development staff on this one. But I think, though, that there's something to be said, even despite all of that, because even despite knowing that, this game was made by an incredibly passionate group of developers who had not really done a fighting game before necessarily, and it was done very quickly, as fast as they could make it, kind of thing. And it turned out really, really well. But I think what's really important about Killer Instinct is that it does something that almost no fighting games tend to do for me, and that is it always makes you feel like you see where you went wrong. Like, a lot of times you play a fighting game, especially if you're unfamiliar with it, you get blown up, you have no idea what just happened or how it happened or how anyone did any of the stuff they did. KI does such a wonderful job of, once you understand the basic mechanics of how the combo system works and how breaking and counter breaking work, you understand exactly where you went wrong, because it's not hard to do combos in Killer Instinct, especially if you're fighting an easy computer or you're fighting a training dummy or whatever. Pulling off combos, no biggie, right? No huge problem. But when you start getting into the systems of, okay, you have to know how to break them and how to counter break them and stuff like that, you see exactly where you go wrong. Like, someone's pulling off a combo on you, you try to break the combo. It'll tell you right away if you tried to break the combo but pressed the wrong button to break, between light, medium, heavy. It tells you right there, boom, you pressed this, but it was that, and now you're locked out, and that's why you're getting walloped on. So it's a game that never feels cheap, or that it never feels like, and there's absolutely a huge wall between, the great players and the newcomers. Of course there's a wall, but it never feels like an unobtainable goal. It never feels like, you like someone who's coming into, say, a versus game for the first time, barely knows what they're doing, gets blown up, see someone do all kinds of aerial rave and delayed air combos and tag combos, and they have no idea how that even happened or what to do, and it's discouraging from a very casual standpoint, where Killer Instinct doesn't have that discouragement feel. It reminds me a lot, in a way, a little more complicated version of Soul Calibur 1 and 2, where there was no extra meters or weird mechanics. Soul Calibur 1 and 2 was like, if you got blown up, you got blown up. It's because you didn't know how to block or parry properly, and that's it. Like, because most things you can see, you could see coming or get around or block it or parry it, but yeah, like Killer Instinct to me is the first game since Soul Calibur 2 that anytime I lose, I know why I lost. And I don't have to sit there and question it or just assume, well, it's such a big, complicated game, I'll never figure it out. So the next game on my list is Sonic Mania. Now, this game I play regularly to this day. I even play it when I'm not doing anything else, when I just got time to kill. It's the absolute best Sonic the Hedgehog game that's ever been made, and it's not even made by Sonic Team. It's basically made by an indie development studio, or I should say like a few indie development studios around the world, and it's absolutely the best Sonic's ever been. It nails the physics and the feel of the classic Genesis-era Sonic games without missing a beat, but it adds all kinds of fun new things, such as scaling effects, transparency effects, stuff like that. It's smooth. It doesn't have any of the slowdown issues that plagued Genesis Mega Drive era. It's just a perfect culmination, a perfect celebration of everything that Sonic the Hedgehog was, and it's insanely replayable to this day. Tons of content, tons of things to collect or unlock that are 100% optional. You don't really have to do any of that stuff. Even the Chaos Emeralds are just as optional as they've always been. But yeah, lots of extra medals to collect, lots of like little doodads to unlock, lots of little gameplay modes you can tweak around with in the debug menu. It's just got everything you would ever want in a classic Sonic game, and it is absolutely, far and away, the best Sonic the Hedgehog game ever. And at the start of this decade, I would never, even in a million years, would I believe that a Sonic the Hedgehog game would come out in the 2010s and it would be the absolute best Sonic the Hedgehog game ever, better than the Genesis efforts. Would never have believed it, but here we are. Number 6, this was actually very close between 6 and 7. You could almost count them as like basically equal. That was Super Mario Odyssey, which was a fantastic follow-up to the Mario 3D platformer series. Now, I enjoyed Mario 3D World, but I clearly didn't think it was quite as amazing as, say, the Galaxy games. And even though Galaxy 2 came out in 2010, I think I enjoyed Super Mario Odyssey more. I think it aimed a little higher. Galaxy 2 is great, but it does feel like a massive DLC expansion pass for the first Galaxy game. It really gutted anything besides levels, and the level designs are good, but they're also very debug-y. They feel like a bunch of random series of floating blocks. Mario Odyssey kind of turned back the clock towards Mario 64, even the first Mario Galaxy slightly, in that it felt like a more cohesive, put together world storyline. Like, you don't need that in a Mario game, but I like it more when they focus a little harder on making environments feel unique and give them all their own sort of character and liveliness, rather than just here's a bunch of checkerboard colored blocks and more checkerboard colored blocks, snowy blocks and sandy blocks. And that's what 3D World kind of was, and I wasn't really a huge fan of it. Mario Odyssey bucked that trend. Gave us full worlds, and at first it was kind of weird because there was a lot of clashing art styles. You had realistic, you had sort of like or modern art-ish, you had like a Dark Souls looking level show up out of nowhere, but I think it gelled in a way that you didn't expect it would, and it was just an exceedingly well done game that was just a joy to play from beginning to end. It also, I love the design of that. Well, if you want to get to the normal ending, it's actually not that long. It's only 5 to 6 hours, but then there's like a whole massive post-game content where you can get like another ending if you if you play like almost double that time and get like a super secret level, a couple super secret levels unlocked, and you beat them, and then you kind of get the true ending. And then there's even a post game where if you want to get like the final little achievement trophy, if you do everything in the game, and they actually do signify it, it's just so well designed, so well done. It's sad that we live in an era where there's really not a lot of 3D platformers being made anymore, but at least, despite the fact that it's sort of a dead genre, at least we're still getting massive jumps in quality with games like Super Mario Odyssey. I hope that we get a follow-up to... I would love an Odyssey 2, honestly. Don't know what Nintendo Tokyo is going to be doing next, but you know, it's going to have big shoes to fill following Odyssey, because Odyssey is fantastic. Number 5 is a game that nobody but me is going to list as their favorite of the decade, and that is Ni no Kuni: The Jet Black Wizard. Now, to make this simple, this is Ni no Kuni DS, the version we never got in North America, which is not the same as the PS3 version. You can look at it like this is Amazing Spider-Man and the PS3 version is Ultimate Spider-Man. Like, that's about how varied the differences are. Yes, it's same characters, same kind of world, but very different takes on the storyline and the villains and what have you. So this is a completely different experience, different battle system. It has more areas than the PS3 version. It has different, completely different, mostly different storyline. It's, again, like to bring it back to Spider-Man, like, you know, Amazing and Ultimate Spider-Man, you still have Peter Parker, he still lives in New York, he still has, you know, Uncle Ben, he still goes against Green Goblin, he still goes against other things, but like the whole setup for how things go is super different, and that's how it is with the DS version of Ni no Kuni, and there is an English fan translation which is available now, which is pretty great, but you also have to download the PDF of the book. And the reason this game never came out in America is because every copy in Japan was sold with the Wizard's Companion book, which is the same book the character uses in the main game. And why this game is so high on this list for me is because this game gave me the immersive experience most people feel with VR that, you know, that I don't really quite have that immersion with it, but playing the game, you had to play it with this real, actual book, you know, like full, you know, honest to God, like, you know, if fake leather, fake pleather, hardbound Wizard's Companion Guide, and to go through the game and solve the puzzles and do the things, they actually required you to actually look through this book and look for clues, look for hints, solve riddles and stuff within the book, look for answers. So it was just such an amazing experience, and I thought, wow, this is something that I could see applying to other video games too, like if you were playing Uncharted or a Tomb Raider game, and you had a physical version of Laura's diary or journal or Nathan Drake's journal, and you had to literally look through it and physically, you know, yourself find the clues and do it. And I actually loved that. I relished that. And it wasn't just a puzzle solving book. It wasn't just a guide. There was all kinds of stuff in it. There was, you know, there's a bestiary, there's stuff about recipes, there was all kinds of short stories and legends and mythos that just did world building in the Wizard's Companion. It was such a wonderful experience, and it really made me feel way more immersed in any video game almost than I ever have. And it's a very unique experience that pretty much almost no one else is going to get unless you imported the game and went through the same things that I did way back in 2010. But it was so worth it for me to import it, to go through it, to experience the game, and having to do and write, you know, look through the Wizard's Companion, do stuff in it, jot notes down. I loved it. It's obviously not going to be a thrilling experience for everyone. Some people just want to veg out on a couch. Totally get it. Even though it's a DS game, and like, hey, if you're on a plane, you can't really sit there and be juggling a DS and a book, and I get it. It totally isn't necessarily a convenient experience, but it is an engrossing experience if you were able to do it. Unfortunately, it looks like this is the kind of gameplay experience that is going to be completely lost to time. I don't see this ever getting an official translation or re-release. The best you can do at this point is download the PDF for the translated Wizard's Companion and get a translated patch for it. That's going to be up to you to figure out how to do that. But I absolutely loved the feel and tactile, you know, physical feeling of holding a book and having to use a book in conjunction with this wonderful Ghibli-esque RPG. Also, the story's way better in the DS version, just pointing that out. Number 4 game of the decade. Not really a huge surprise now, but Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. This, is a game that hardly needs any real explanation. It's a wish fulfillment game. I mean, you've got Microsoft characters, you've got Atlas characters, Sega characters, Capcom characters, you know, Konami characters back when they were good, and all these different characters from all these different franchises, all these different games, Square Enix characters, like all with Nintendo. And it's just a giant celebration of video games. It's no longer just, hey, it's interesting seeing Nintendo's characters get all cartoonishly violent. Now it's video games. It's video games, the video game, you know, by a video game super fan, Sakurai. So I love the game. It's still going. We're still getting more characters. We're still getting more content added to it. But even if they had stopped today, it would still be an absolutely massive love letter to gaming in general. Because I mean, we even got SNK in there, of all things. This is truly one of the most special, unique games that I think will probably ever come out, period. You're never going to see this kind of this level of crossover in any video game ever again. I really don't think so. I mean, I would bet money that in my own lifetime, I will never see as many different competing companies all come together universally for such a wonderful, beloved, fun fighting game that is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. We're just never going to see this again. And you know, I'm okay with that, but it's just, yeah, this game just keeps getting better because at this point, the game's solid as it is. And every new additional fighter they add is just more icing on this massive, beautiful, tasty cake. And I would find it hard to believe anyone could say, you know, make a list of best games of the decade and not include this game. Because this game is probably one of those games that stretches beyond the decade. This game stretches the entire 40-plus year video game history. So, yeah, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Now, for the top three, I'm just going to say this right now. Well, you know what? Before we get to the top three, let me just round out my sort of honorable mentions, if you will. These are games that I thought were really good, and there were more games than even this that I listed that were really good, but these are the games that I thought really sort of were big titles that I enjoyed playing throughout the decade. Mario Galaxy 2, Donkey Kong Country Returns, Red Dead Redemption, Bayonetta, Mortal Kombat 9, Ultimate Marvel 3, Arkham City. You know, those I really like Arkham City, but you know, Mortal Kombat 9, Ultimate Marvel 3, I didn't really play a ton of them. I wasn't really good at them, but I definitely felt they added a lot to bringing back Versus Series, bringing in a giant, massive campaigns to fighting games. I thought they were really good for what they did. Journey, Walking Dead Season 1, Skullgirls, those were all, you know, really good games that were all, you know, not necessarily, not AAA, but all really good. If there was any Assassin's Creed I would have enjoyed or said I would have nominated 4. Saints Row 4 was a blast, you know, just for being just a fun game with lots of comedy, which you don't get in video games a lot, and it's usually not done very well. And I loved Saints Row 4 for the fact that it could be a funny video game, and super inclusionary as well. Shovel Knight, obviously, Ori and the Blind Forest, Doom 2016, Xenoblade 2, Nier Automata, Ys 8, Yakuza 0, Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 2 remake, Devil May Cry 5, Bloodstained, God of War 2018, Monster Hunter World, all absolutely worthy of recognition for being outstanding games this decade. But now for my top three, which again I wanted to preface by saying these top three can kind of be in any order. You can think of it as a tie if you want, and the only reason I'm ordering it like this is that I put the game with the minimalist nitpicks. The number one, the number one game I put was like the game I thought most perfect. You know, the 2 and 3 were kind of like, well, as much as I love these games, there are some tiniest of nits I could pick. But just think of these top three as sort of any order, if you will, because they really are, in my mind, just about all in the same place for number one. But the three best games of this decade for me were Xenoblade 1, which restored my faith in the JRPG genre, as it had kind of fallen really hard during like the PS2, sort of mid PS2 era, and all through the HD era. Like I had kind of given up, lost hope in the whole genre completely, and Xenoblade was the game to restore my faith in it by giving me the game I always wanted and dreamed of that I would finally get, and it came from the absolute most unlikely of places. I never in a million years would have thought that Monolith Soft would be the one to give me the giant open exploration heavy RPG series that I always dreamed of and craved, because they were like previously the antithesis of exploration of massive open worlds. They were a extremely tiny linear corridor, massive movie, hour-long cutscene kind of game. They represented the worst of the genre and sort of come to represent the best of the genre. It's such a wonderful Cinderella story for me. They're like my favorite studio now. So absolutely, Xenoblade is not only was it a favorite game of mine, but it was an important game for me. It was important, I feel, for the industry or the genre, and it was the company and the game itself kickstarted what was probably one of the most important studios for Nintendo to lead it into its future where it is now. Number 2 is Bayonetta 2. This is still the best character-driven action game I've ever played. Nothing feels as good or as tight as playing Bayonetta 2. The constant variety of situations and action scenarios that you go into is still second to none. The boss fights against Baldur are so good. I guess that's a bit of a spoiler. Oh well, you should have already played it by now. Yeah, the Lumen Sage fights are so darn good. Feel so responsive, and it feels like you're in the middle of a high octane, rapid pace anime fight scene, but you're still in full control. And it's absolutely the best of the best when it comes to visuals, art style, and variety that the genre still has. And it's a meaty game, but it's not too long. Full of secrets, full of unlockables, full of stuff to do. Co-op as well, which we don't really see a whole lot of in other games of its type. It's absolutely the best of its class, and it feels the best to play even to this day. I still love playing this game the most. And then my number 1 game of the decade, no surprise if you know me, and that's Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. This is probably the closest thing I've played to perfection in a video game this decade. I mean, absolutely this decade, I would say it makes a strong argument all time. The level design is perfect. The environments are gorgeously thought out and rendered. There is huge variety of things to do. Even though it is a side-scroller platformer, they mix it up, make every level unique. The music is sublime. It's out of this world. They got David Wise back, to do the full soundtrack, and it's perfect. It's something I still listen to this day. Like they didn't succumb to picking like a shitty environment or area. There's no factory level setting. There's no volcano level setting. They did away with all the shitty levels that you never want to replay in a side scroller. It's just gold. It's mangroves and Swiss Alps and bright savanna and like a sea breeze cove and like this giant fruity jungle and then your frozen wasteland or your frozen home, frozen tropical freeze. You have to reclaim, and it's perfect. Like it's the perfect levels. It's levels you want to replay all the way from the last area to the first area. It's music you want to listen to long after the game stopped playing. It's got secrets and bonuses and extra challenges you want to come back to. It is like a perfect video game, and it's funny because it was met with so much disappointment when it was first announced, because fuck, Retro is just making another fucking Donkey Kong Country. Well, I hope Retro, even though they're making Metroid Prime 4, which I'm excited for, but I wish Retro was making another fucking Donkey Kong Country game, because this game, Tropical Freeze, ended up being, to me, the absolute pinnacle of its genre, of its system that it was on when it came out on the Wii U, and it's absolutely the best game I played in the entire decade of the 2010s. So that is my list, and it is by no means a definitive list for everyone. It's a definitive list for me, and just hope you guys liked hearing it. Digging my brain a little bit, seeing what I thought was the best games of the decade. And you guys can let me know what you guys thought were the best games of the decade in the comments below, and I will see you on the channel later, dudes.